There is nothing called consumer loyalty. Unless you build in insights on what the consumer wants into every part of your mix, whether it is product, whether it is proposition, I don't think a brand can be vaguely successful. In our core TG is the mother teen duo. Your media strategy needs to change. Digital gives me that scope to do that.
Yeah.
If I'm a large brand where there is no need for that direct access, I don't necessarily need to create a D2C strategy.
क्या आपके पास 2 मिनट है? बिकॉज उतने में मैगी बन जाती है. By now, you must have guessed our next guest. No? Well, it's none other than Kanika, who's the marketing head at a beloved brand Maggi. She has 10 years of experience and she's worked with brands like HUL and Nestle. Hi Kanika, how are you?
I'm very well, Akriti. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
So I'll start off with, just a little snippet of who I am. So I hail from Calcutta and I did my undergrad in commerce. And after that, I belong to a Marwadi family. So much against my father's wishes, went on to pursue an MBA from IMK. But never looked back after that. Immediately joined HUL, which was like a dream come true for me. Immediately after campus, worked with them for about 6.5 years, and then moved on to Nestle, and I've been with them for about 4.5 years now. Joined Nestle on a brand called Nestle Everyday, and I was senior brand manager of that brand, and then I moved into Maggi Noodles, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years.
Wow, yeah, that's like a dream for most of the people listening to this podcast today.
I dream or not, I don't know. I'm of course I've worked hard, but also been very lucky, and I'm of course in a lot of gratitude for having been given this opportunity. And yeah, I try to put my best towards making sure that I do whatever I can out of it.
Nice, yeah. So Maggi is such a big brand, but we look at brand from a lens of turnover, or turnaround. How do you define like a big brand?
So, see, typically, I mean, it's very easy to classify a brand in terms of a turnover, but I think the fundamental thing of marketing and what defines a large brand is what goes behind it, which, at least for me, I think is a simple metric of two numbers. At what stage is your category, which is defined as a category penetration? How many people in the country, so if you're talking in the Indian context, how many people in the country are consuming that category in a year, and how many people are consuming your brand? If both the numbers are high, then your brand is a large brand. I think it's as simple a math as that. Typically, people look at large brands in terms of turnover, and that's the easiest identifiable metric. But if you look at within the FMCG context, you would see that the larger brands, the 2,000 crore plus brands, will typically be in categories that are very well penetrated, and also the brand itself is very, very well penetrated. Unlike, say, a category like maybe smartphones or a car, where actually the penetration numbers might not be so high, but then the turnovers might actually be much larger than those of the FMCG company or the brand, because the ticket size is that much smaller.
Absolutely. So I think it also depends from industry to industry.
Absolutely.
So 1,000 crore brand might be big for some industry, but it might be smaller for a brand like in mobiles or like automobile, like you said.
I mean, if I were just to simplify it, just think about how much a consumer puts down every time they buy a single unit of the product. So every time a consumer buys a Maggi, which of course is 14 rupees on an average, versus say if you buy an Apple phone, which will cost you 1,40,000 rupees. So that's that also a lot of time determines the size of the company. But of course, I think the fundamental of large brands remains to drive brand penetration. I think that's the fundamental belief of Marketing 101.
So Kanika, how do you define brand penetration?
So I'll simplify this. In the Indian context, if you assume that India has a population of about 140 crore people, individuals, brand penetration gets defined at a household level, not
Okay.
at an individual level. So if there are 140 crore individuals, there are about 28 crore households in
Got
India.
it.
If a household over a period of a year buys your brand at least once, then that household gets calculated or gets taken into as a part of your brand penetration. So assume I'm a brand and 5 crore households in India buy me at least once a year. Then my penetration would approximately be about 20%. So it's
Okay.
7 crores 5 crores divided by 28, which is approximately 20%.
Got it. And how do numbers like these look for Maggie?
Well, I won't go into quoting the exact numbers, but I will just tell you that for any given brand, and especially for larger brands, you look at very different sets of penetration numbers. Because, say, for a category, and I'll keep Maggie aside and give you another example, like a category like a soap would have a 99% monthly penetration,
Wow.
right? Because you're buying, everybody in India buys a soap at least once a month. It's
Correct.
very, very basic. When you come into packaged food, the number of monthly penetration itself falls. Even the annual penetration number falls. How many people are buying me at least once a year? So
Right.
then it goes into the at least zone. That number will be close to, my sense is about 65, not more than 65% at an urban plus rural level. The other reality of our country, which gets missed out, is the stark disparity between urban and rural numbers, or
Yeah.
urban and rural numbers. So if I were just to give you a context of noodles as a category, in urban India, about 9 out of 10 households would be buying a noodles or a Maggi packet once a year. But if I were to give you that same number for a rural market, it will be about 3 out of 10.
Wow.
So that's the stark, and this is over an annual period, which is why I think FMCG for me is a fascinating industry, because the scope, and I mean, there's that much growth in the country still to be done, and we are talking still about a brand as entrenched as Maggie. So you can imagine for other still nascent categories, so many in personal care, so many other in adjacent food categories. It's just a land of opportunity.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. So now that we're talking about growth, how do large brands grow? Like, because the delta,
Yeah.
that 1% delta is so difficult to achieve in an FMCG or like a
Yeah.
larger brand.
right.
Like, what do you do to, grow these brands?
So I'll try to simplify this, because it's very, like you rightly said, the larger the brand, the more difficult it is to grow it. I'm going to divide it into sort of two parts. A little bit about brand strategy, and a little bit on your users and how do you deal with your penetration or your user base. In terms of brand strategy, see, you have to, the fundamental of marketing is to define your source of growth, what is called SOG, or source of growth. Where is my growth going to come from? So is my growth going to come from acquiring new users? Is my growth going to come from getting my existing consumers to have more? Or is my growth going to come from getting, or is my decline going to stop from stopping this leaky bucket of people who are leaving my brand or category, and ensuring that I retain them? Because it depends on, it's very easy to talk about brand strat in general, but everything about how you grow your brand depends on which category you're operating, what are the dynamics of the category, and hence what are the dynamics of your brand.
Yeah.
So if I were to give you an example of a relatively smaller in the FMCG context, not a small brand, but let's take the example of something that's quite nascent, like any hair conditioner brand, right? Hair conditioners in India would roughly have a penetration of not more than 7 to 8%, right?
Wow.
Even in the urban context. So now if my penetration itself is 7 to 8%, my source of growth will always be to acquire new users. If I move the needle from 7 to 9, I have gotten more than 30% growth on my brand.
Yeah,
it's as easy as
absolutely.
that. Or let's take an alternate example of, say, a category like coffee. I know young people like us drink a lot of coffee, so we believe that coffee numbers would be very, very high. But penetration-wise, I think coffee penetration in non-South part of the country would not be in excess of 20%. So there again, the source of growth, or how a brand, any brand in the coffee space, or the larger brands in the coffee space would grow by acquiring new users, driving penetration up, and that's how you would, grow your brand. In case of a brand which are more well entrenched, there are two ways in which you can grow, and I'll give you two sort of disparate examples to explain. I'll go back to my favorite example of soaps. In a category like soaps, where typically you cannot increase consumption, you cannot get me to use 2 bars of soap in a month versus one, right? My consumption is limited. My category penetration is at 100, like I was telling you. Practically everybody in the country is using a soap once a year. There, for a brand, like let's take an example, I'm a premium soap brand. There, my source of growth would come from gaining share from other brands. That would be my source of growth.
Right.
So my brand strat would be, a part of my brand strat would be, what do I tell my consumers, or what is my proposition to ensure that people who are, say, if I'm a premium brand, who are using mass brands, upgrade to a premium brand, soap brand, which is mine. That becomes one bucket. In a second bucket could be, which operates a lot in the food space, foods, beverages, where there is scope to increase consumption of a single user as well.
Consumption per person.
Consumption per person. So today I eat Maggi once a year. How do I ensure that I get you to eat Maggi twice a year?
Correct.
So that also becomes, so for Maggi, honestly, if I try to break it down, it'll get too complex. I'm going to keep it simple. But there are different tasks that we define for urban audiences, where, like I was telling you, penetration, like 9 out of 10 consumers in the country would be having a Maggi once a year, versus a urban audience or a rural audience, where the task still remains to get people to have Maggi at least once a year. That would be the source of growth. A lot of times, depending on the context and what, economic parameters, something like a COVID coming in, your balance between the two would shift. At times when economic growth is high, you would see the urban part of your business accelerating, new users coming into your brand, and that really giving force to growth on a brand like Maggi. In other parts, if I were to take an example of a COVID where we were all confined to our houses, number of options that you're getting out of home were limited, there you would have seen a big spike in, say, your urban consumption, where you're driving frequency or monthly penetration itself. I don't think there's any one straight answer to saying how, brands sort of grow. So that's on the strategy bit of it. If I were to sort of simplify it and put it, because I like to talk in very simple means so that people understand, and strategy sometimes, when you've spent a lot of time, it becomes easier to understand. It becomes as simple as, for large brands, their first task is, whoever is eating me today or whoever is consuming me today, how do I ensure they continue doing that? This bucket to retain is priority one.
Building loyalty and retention.
I will not say loyalty. We should talk about loyalty hence as well. So there's one bucket that these people are eating me. How do I retain them in a category like say noodles? But how do I keep getting incremental, whether it's from the same set of users or whether it is from new users? That's it. It's as simple as that. So I mean, that's how I would sort of, put it, if to simplify it for.
So, like you said, that you want to retain these existing set of consumers that you have, right? How do you define loyalty versus retention, and how do you define them individually?
Okay, tough question to define. I think loyalty is a metric often spoken about, especially today. Brand loyalty and loyalty metrics have sort of become the trend. But if I were to keep Maggi aside and just talk in terms of FMCG and largely how categories and consumers behave, because everything goes back to what is the consumer truth. There is nothing called consumer loyalty, right? Consumers will typically be loyal in case of categories where there is only one brand, or there is that one brand which is so differentiated that nobody else can compete with it. And I'll come to where Maggi sort of plays in this whole thing. But typically, if you see, which is why marketing has 6 Ps, and all the Ps function in tandem to sort of, deliver the growth for the brand. But there is nothing called consumer loyalty. People make decisions every day. People make decisions every month. And consumers are largely fickle. There will be categories which are thriving on lack of loyalty. like say a category like a deodorants, I don't want to use the same deodorant every day. That is the fundamental consumer truth. There, of course, it's very clear, different brands. I'll keep trying different brands over a period of maybe 2 to 3 years, repeat the first choice of either the brand into whatever fragrance I'm liking. In other categories, it becomes a lot of play between what I'm choosing today, what is the price that I'm ready to pay today. And largely, you would see consumers switching a lot between brands and also consuming multiple brands at the same time.
Absolutely.
So I think loyalty in that sense is for largely all FMCG categories, I would say loyalty is not the key metric to look at.
Got it.
Your own penetration, your own consumption is what is in your control, which is where I was talking about retention.
Yeah.
Who I have, how do I retain? I cannot ensure that they don't buy anything else.
Yeah.
That I think
That
is,
you cannot.
yeah. That is something that I don't think a lot of people understand. But that is the reality of most FMCG brands. In case of Maggi, however, contradicting my own statement, there is a high degree of loyalty. The single metric that I think, sorry for getting a little technical on this, loyalty can only be defined as if I buy in this category only this brand and nothing else over a period of a year.
Yeah.
That is your loyalty. Consumer base. Yeah. In case of Maggi, however, that is true. Of course, because like I was saying, if your proposition is so differentiated and so consistently built, which in Maggi's case is true for the last 40 years, then yes, you do have a loyal consumer base. Yeah. In foods, typically, we do see loyalty. Correct. Also because taste preferences get very well developed. I think even in tea, I'm not very sure, but I think even in categories like tea, loyalty would be a big metric.
Absolutely.
But I think the bigger bucket of growth, if I were to talk about it, so yes, you have your loyal set of users, but I think the growth bucket is always retention. How do I retain who I have and how do I get the new?
Absolutely.
Very, very simple.
Yes, very well put, yeah. So Kanika, you mentioned a very interesting line that there is no consumer loyalty. What do you mean by that? Like, we hear consumer loyalty all the time. So give us some examples.
No. Let me clarify before all the marketing gurus of the world come and kill me. What I mean is, at any given point, because FMCG products are typically daily use, purchased often categories, there is a decision that the consumer makes every time they go to buy your brand. So I might be a very loyal consumer of, say, a particular washing powder, but tomorrow the brand decides to take up their pricing by 40%. Even though I'm a very, very loyal user, I suddenly decide that that 40% premium for the same product is not worth for me paying. So even loyal consumers would choose to switch to other brands or would choose to other categories, not consume the category at all in some cases, depending on, say, how your product has changed, depending on your communication, depending on your pricing, which is what I meant by there is no customer loyalty or there is no consumer loyalty, because largely it's a function of a lot of things coming together at the same time. And yes, in a lot of categories, there is frequent switching and a frequent decision making that the consumer is making at multiple points. In a lot of categories as well, I mean, that might not be true. For example, let's say a category which is very taste dependent, like a chai, where I know my brand of chai, and I'm going to stick to it no matter what happens. So yes, there would be a lot of loyalty.
Despite the price hike, you would still stick to it.
I mean, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing there would be a certain percentage of even the loyal consumers who would say, okay, I love this brand so much that I'm going to stick. But I fundamentally believe that your most loyal set of consumers would not be contributing to more than 20 to 30% of overall business for most large brands.
Got it. So that brings me to another very interesting question. There's so many brands and startups that are coming, right? How do they bring out a challenger proposition to compete with these larger brands?
Very interesting question. But I think just, before we get into the challenger proposition bit, there are largely 3 things that are important if you want to be a challenger brand. I think the first is to assess the category that you're entering. What is the scope of growth in that category? So if the category itself is declining, the pie is shrinking, what are you going
Give
to
us
get
an
out of?
example.
So say a category like talcum powder, right?
Okay.
Usage and penetration in India is only dropping. You will, unless we're really wrong, you will rarely find a challenger talcum powder
Yeah.
brand coming into the space, right?
Correct.
So that's the first. That category itself should be in a position where the category itself is growing. The second is to say over a long period, if there's only say one giant that's operating, do you fundamentally believe that there is scope for the equilibrium to be maintained where there would be at least 2 to 3 large players operating? Typical case of what we are seeing today with, say, an Amazon or a Flipkart, right?
Correct.
2 large giants operating. The third is, how do you come in with a differentiated proposition? What do you say to disrupt, right? Now, I will violate both of what I've said in my first 2 statements with what I'm going to say now. Now, imagine e-commerce in India becomes a declining category.
Oh my God.
Assume for a minute, just humor me. Supposing we're talking 70 years into the future, e-commerce has started declining. There are 2 giants which exist, Amazon and Flipkart. Very little possibility that there would be a scope for a third. But then enters somebody with a disruption of quick commerce. And assuming quick commerce does not exist, which it does today, that is disruption, because what e-commerce or what a Flipkart and an Amazon were delivering in say 7 days, somebody has come in with a what we call differentiated proposition to say, I will deliver it to you in the next 15 minutes.
Correct.
So despite the 1 and 2 not being true, you could have a use case for a 3 if you have a differentiated proposition, which is the most important thing. In FMCG terms, largely you would want all 3 to be true, and that's how large companies you would see when they decide to enter into categories, how they sort of define it. But of course, if you have a disruptive proposition, like I was saying, in case of a talcum powder also, just to contradict myself, if I came in with a product innovation where using a talcum powder, you didn't have to apply a soap into a deodorant into talcum powder, who knows, maybe the category starts growing.
Yeah.
Or maybe there is still scope for that brand to have a positioning. So largely this is it. If I could give you examples of, just to sort of, because I might have confused all your viewers with contradicting myself, just to give a very simple example in traditional FMCG terms of a challenger proposition. My favorite examples of this brand called Pediasure. So it operates in the HFD category, lots of players. There's Horlicks, there's Boost, which talks about energy, there's Bonvita, which talks about Tayari Jeet Ki, and then there comes in this brand called Pediasure, which is from Abbott. Now what they've done is they have, they've challenged all the existing players with a proposition that's, sort of very well rooted in a consumer need. So anytime when you want to make a challenger proposition, you need to come from some fundamental consumer truth, which is unaddressed typically by the brands that are operating right now. In this case, they picked up on the fact that there are a lot of particular requirements that young kids have that don't get fulfilled. And of course, Abbott as a company has expertise in medicine and more
you call
nutrition.
this consumer insight.
This typically would come from a consumer insight.
So how do you really make a consumer insight and say that this is an insight and this can be a challenger proposition?
I think it would go back to segmenting your different, like who is your consumer. So let's take the example that we were given. Typically, and I don't know the reality, I'm just talking as a marketer. If I were to look at the category and say, hey, typically malt drink consumption starts at the age of 4 and continues till the age of teens. So 13, 14 typically is, or maybe 15 is when people are having it. All my brands today are operating in the space of, say, my age group of 7 to 14. Nobody is addressing, apart from Junior Horlicks, which is also small, addressing the bottom segment.
Correct.
So to say, this segment of very young users, people who may be having, specific issues with respect to weight, bone health, etc. And then there I come in and I make, a proposition that actually appeals to my consumer. I charge a premium for it because I come in with a lot more scientific sort of claims and a lot more benefit out proposition. versus say a Bonvita which talks about overall taste and tayari jeet ki, etc. So I think that's where the bulk of a challenger proposition sort of lies.
Right. So there's a very interesting story I heard. So there was an ice cream brand from Russia, okay, who saw an uptake in sales in winters more than they saw in summers.
Right.
So they thought that it is an insight, okay.
Yeah.
But actually, what was happening was that their ACs in their trucks were not working in the summers, leading to spoiling of the ice cream and then adversely affecting the sales, right? So that was a situation now, right? That was an insight.
Right.
So how do large brands, right, or any brand for that matter, decide that this is an insight we want to go ahead with? That there could be multiple observations, but how do they come to that one insight and say that, this is it?
See, this I think is, a lot of our time goes in inciting. So I'm just trying to figure out how do I answer this in 2 minutes. But I think I'll divide it again into 2 parts just for ease. I like to think of it as there are brands whose foundation itself comes from a very strong consumer insight and not a product insight. It's not a product need. It's a very emotional need itself that the brand's foundation lies on.
Correct.
Let's take an example of something like a Dove, which talks
Absolutely.
about beauty is a source of anxiety for women. So what can we do? And then their entire product ranges talk about that. Now that is rooted in a consumer truth that women around the world do feel like that. And hence everything that the brand would hence do would follow in that
Correct.
palette because that's their insight.
Yeah.
On the other hand, most of the time you would see that it comes from a product need also. Like a washing powder does not come from an emotional need, it comes from a need. I need to wash my clothes tomorrow, right? But there again, unless you build in insights on what the consumer wants into every part of your mix, whether it is product, whether it is proposition, I don't think a brand can be vaguely successful.
Yeah.
And hence with every campaign, in fact, that you aim to do, I think all marketers try to sort of, put in some sort of inciting and deep consumer insight into it. And I'd just like to sort of step back and, there's somebody who I admire a lot called Sudhir Sitapati from my ex-company. He had in his book written something which I found very profound on what an insight is. Basically, he said that an insight is a contradiction which in retrospect seems obvious. So,
Wow.
You would not think of it upfront, but the minute
Yeah.
I tell you this, you would be like, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
just right there in front
It was
of your
right
eyes.
there. How did I not articulate this earlier? So I think that's the fundamental of an insight. I'd just share something that I found very profound working on the brand that Maggi. Our core TG, for example, and just to sort of explain, our core TG is the mother-teen duo,
Correct.
right? If I want to craft an insight which is very true and base my campaigns and my communication ideas on that, I have to really understand this duo. What is there?
Yeah.
What are the dynamics of this relationship, and what role does Maggi play? So, if I were just to simplify it and not go into too many details, Maggi strengthens the mother-teen bond. That's our role.
That's beautiful.
That's how we've defined our role for years, right? But if I were to craft an insight, and this is something that I think 2 campaigns in Maggi have done beautifully, and I'd just like to take that, is to say, understand deep into this relationship and see what are the different stages that it goes through. Might sound an oversimplification, but I'll still try. Think about how a child is when they are pre-teens, say when they are 8 or 9. Think about a child when they just step into their teenage years,
Yeah.
and then think about a child who is slightly older. And then, you really go on to understanding how does this dynamic change when the mother and the child are going through this journey.
Yeah.
So typically, and when I tell you, you'll probably agree and be like, hey, yeah, this seems to be
Yeah.
true and quite intuitive, is
Very evident.
when kids are 8 or 9 years, there's a high degree of dependence on the mother,
Correct.
right? They rely on them for most things. Their mothers are typically their world.
Correct.
Then there's this time when the child steps into their
Teens.
the first step, where there's this need for beginning
Independence.
of independence, right? I want to be
Yeah.
independent, but I'm trying to figure how. Right? And of course, then there are different cuts that different brands can take. Somebody can talk about and depends on how it fits in with their product truth and their proposition, but the struggles and how a child becomes a rebellion.
Correct.
In our case, it was to pick up and say the mother is recognizing that my child needs that little bit of push towards first step towards independence. And I don't know if you've seen that, but there was this film that we had done which spoke about a mother letting her child make their first bowl of Maggie as a step
Wow.
of independence.
Yeah.
So that was the insight of saying, that's the first thing of, if you look at this duo, the mother is understanding that my child
Yeah.
needs this. The child is also trying to figure the balance. I think that was one, wonderful piece of work and wonderful piece of inciting that we've done. And then fast forward to a few years where we said, okay, now when this child grows up, then what happens? Slightly fast forward to 2 to 3 years. So this child has stepped in, has started becoming independent, probably goes through a zone where the mother starts feeling, does my child even need me anymore? They start feeling a little redundant, as my child can do practically everything
Yeah.
by themselves.
Yeah.
Now, what am I trying to do? And where is my, what is my purpose in his
Correct.
life? And then at this point, then we picked up on something to say the opposite. The child understands what the mother is feeling. Because it's such a united,
Yeah.
it's one unit, which is why when we talk about our TG, we always say it is the entity. It is not
Yeah.
the mother or the teen.
Yeah.
And for the child to sort of understand that and display that through Maggie, which was the entire, I don't know if you've seen the last film, but that was the center of it, which was to say that this child also understands that, realizes the importance of the relationship with the mother enough to say, I want to display care, and Maggie helps me
Yeah.
do that. Because a lot of times, if you think about teenagers, they do care. They struggle to find the right means to sort of show it. How do I display that I care? What is the right way to not appear uncool,
Yeah.
but still display it? So I think that was the sort of insight that we captured on. So fundamentally, see, we integrated back to the product. What is Maggie's role? And there's a lot of work that goes behind it. Sounds simplistic, but when you go back and tell the backstory, like I've just told you, it should seem like, yes, this happens to most of us.
Yeah.
Then you've cracked a real insight, is my
Yeah.
fundamental belief.
Absolutely. I think, and that insight is very important for you to bring out that challenger positioning we were talking about, the ad campaigns that comes out, and how you really connect with the consumer,
Right.
because you kind of understand the relationship and what they're actually going through in that process.
Right, absolutely. And the consumers typically will relate to your brand more, will love your brand
Absolutely.
more when it is rooted in their truth, which is what
Yeah.
inciting does.
Yeah.
It's something that I want my consumer to see and nod and say, yes, this is what happens to me, and hence I see a role for your brand in my life, and I know
Yeah.
what you bring to me.
Yeah, if you just don't connect with them physically via a product, but you connect with them emotionally.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a big part of any large brand, of building emotional resonance, and you would see
Absolutely.
a lot of brands doing great work at it, but the foundation of all of that is to have a kick-ass insight, I would say.
Yeah. So, Kanika, let's talk about a buzzword that's there, which is digital disruption. How do you think this digital disruption has disrupted the industry?
So, Akriti, I'll start off by first saying I don't think it's a buzzword. The disruption is very real. What
Yes.
we've seen in the last 10 to 12 odd years in India, it's like a paradigm shift, is what I would say. Like the entire wave of digitization that has actually come into all aspects of our lives also, right? So, I mean, in terms of how digital marketing for large brands have changed or what disruption it's had on the FMCG industry overall, let me divide it into two. So, in terms of the industry overall, FMCG industry, just let's go back 30, 40 years to see how large brands became large. Uh, there were two ways. Either there were some brands which started in small pockets and then they kept capturing captive audiences in
Yeah,
those small
larger
states, very
audiences.
little investments being put in, great products like a Nirma, for example. And then this slowly went on to become national players. The other side were large FMCG companies, large multinational companies that entered the country, and they had big pockets. With big pockets came the ability to spend on whatever was the medium at that
Correct.
point in time, right? Which was TV, which was print, both of which were very expensive mediums.
Correct.
So today, even if I was a small brand, people didn't know about me. There was no, the fundamental of any brand is awareness, consideration, trial. When there is no awareness, how do I get
Yeah.
people down the funnel?
Yeah.
And awareness was, the power of awareness only stayed with the large brands or the larger companies which could fund brands to become larger.
Correct.
With digital, all of these rules are today disrupted, right? Because today I can spend very little money if I know which consumer, which TG, and the exact sort of demographics of who I want to go after. In a very small pool of money also, I
Correct.
can generate awareness for my
Correct.
brand. So those rules of and salience, or as we call it, recall, is the fundamental pillar. No, if I don't remember the brand, I'm not going to buy the brand. So
Correct.
I think that is the first disruption that's happened in the industry, which is why you will see a host of these, lots of new brands coming into every single category, because there is that, digital gives that opportunity. The second, I think, is how, brands have had to adapt to the digital disruption.
Yeah.
In two ways, I would say. One is in terms of how they design their content, stemming from the simple thing of how is content being consumed today. There is
Correct.
so much digital content being
Absolutely.
consumed that brands that don't adhere to that are going to find themselves lagging. That's the second big sort of disruption that's come in. Today there is no TV forward content brand. There would be brands which only think, forget digital content, they're thinking Instagram forward content, they're thinking reel forward, story forward, YouTube forward,
absolutely.
shorts forward. So I think that's one big disruption in the type of assets that marketers create, right? Otherwise,
Right.
typically, so when you start thinking, you think, okay, I'll make a 45-second long film, then I will cut it to a 30-second, then I will cut it to a
Yeah.
15-second. That's how we are wired to think.
Yeah, and all for TV.
All for TV,
Yeah.
mostly because bulk of your advertising was TV.
Correct.
Today, suddenly now we've had to relook at all of it and say, okay, cool, but then what about disrupting in 15 seconds?
and
where
tweaking that content accordingly. Like, for example, for Instagram reel, you need, like, in 7 seconds you want to grab
you want to
the
grab the attention, and the same mindset to content is not
Yeah.
going to work today.
Correct.
Because stemming content consumption is different on
Correct.
these platforms. I don't have the attention span of
Correct.
what I would have had if I was watching on TV and there are only 4 channels that exist and I am forced to watch those 4 channels,
Correct.
which was the thing in the late 80s, for example. The second thing is and while Instagram, YouTube, and most of your viewers would also understand it, I think the true disruption is actually in rural India.
Yeah.
When you walk into a house and when Google comes back and gives you numbers on saying digital penetration in rural is so much,
Yeah.
and you kind of take a look at it and say, no, this is sounding a little off. But then when you go and you actually see physically that in every rural household today, there might not be a TV, but there's a smartphone on which content consumption is happening, you realize that your media strategy needs to change to how the country is evolving. So I think large brands, in terms of how they allocate their spends between a TV medium and a digital medium, has completely had
Yeah.
to change. I don't
Yeah.
think it was a want to change. I think it's a must do, because
Yeah.
you evolve
And a
with your
very
consumers.
surprising fact, your YouTube subscription, India has taken over US in terms of YouTube
Yeah.
subscription.
Of course, because that's exactly what I'm saying. Where do you think bulk of them are coming from? Urban India is still 30% of India.
Yeah.
So it has to be the rural audiences which are actually consuming that much content. I think the third disruption is Marketing 101 used to tell us that there were 3 pillars to sort of building purchase, right? There's awareness, there's consideration, there's trial. But every time you did marketing for big brands, there was no scope to differentiate at a consumer level on saying, okay, I will go to 80% of my audience and build awareness. Out of that, now I will disrupt and I will segment this and then go and build consideration. And then these people who have moved down the funnel and then go to the 10% and, target them at a 7+ frequency to
Yeah.
ensure they buy my brand. Digital gives me that scope to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other big change that's happened, that across the funnel today, how I change and I adapt my brand strategy to ensure I keep moving you down the funnel, I think is the biggest disruption
Yeah.
that FMCG brands have
Yeah.
sort of seen.
Yeah. And I think D2C has played a huge role in that.
I think D2C has not played a role in the former. Digital has played a big role in D2C
Yeah.
becoming
Absolutely.
prevalent in the country.
Absolutely.
So the other way around, actually. But yeah, look at the number of D2C, sort of brands that are
Yeah.
coming into every space. I think personal care and beauty, especially, the sort of disruption with D2C
Yeah.
brands, makeup as a category that we're seeing
Absolutely.
is and now even why only beauty and personal care, even getting into foods and packaged foods, etc. The sort of disruption that's happening with D2C is massive in the country.
Absolutely. So, how do you think has the marketing for D2C, is different from a traditional marketing?
I'll make this answer very simple. Starting point of any argument should be, whatever be the brand that I'm selling, who am I selling to? Who is my consumer? Typically today, the stage at which D2C is for a more premium audience who is willing to go all along the way to a different website to order you directly.
Absolutely.
So you would not be going down to an SEC C. Your core audience will not be an SEC C or D consumer.
Correct.
Is the first principle. Obviously a more premium audience. The second thing which happens as a result of that is that the propositions that you play with, for example, in a large FMCG setup versus a D2C setup will be that much different, right?
Correct.
Today, the proposition of a Fair and Lovely will be very different from a proposition of, say, a brand like Dot & Key.
Correct.
More D2C, more appealing to higher order benefits, because that's the difference in the consumer that I'm talking
Correct.
to. So I think that's the first difference. Your propositions really need to sort of differ very largely. FMCG companies, going back to what I was talking about, will always focus on, I already have a large user base. What can I do with this large user base? How do I get them to consume me more often? How do I upgrade them? How do I get new users? D2C will largely be about acquiring. How do I get people to try my brand in the first place?
And also about data, to analyze
a lot
the
of
consumer
it.
Data.
I was going to come to that, but yes, of course, you pointed it out very rightly. The third thing is the media strategy that I use.
Yeah.
Large brands will look at mass salience. Today, when you think of any large brand, they would look at, how do I get the maximum reach in the least possible money?
Yeah.
D2C brands will say, how do I identify the exact consumer cohort that I have? The sharper I define my consumer cohort, if I need to sell, tools that help you deliver a better podcast, how do I define the persona of an Akriti to the T?
Yeah.
And go after all the Akritis in India, versus keeping it loose and saying Akriti plus Kanika is my TG.
Yeah.
That is what D2C
Correct.
nails very, very well.
Correct.
And of course, then this entire thing of performance marketing, which I think D2C does very, very well,
Yeah.
which is to say, how do I ensure at every stage I am testing for what is giving me better results. So
Correct.
it's I think performance marketing is a misunderstood term. I think for me it's just about, I would say it's about constant optimization.
Yeah.
Every stage, how do I optimize to see what is giving me better results?
Absolutely.
It's like if you sorry, it's going to sound like a very bad example, but if you go back to how Banyas used to operate, right? Every stage of everything that they do, they are constantly optimizing, because funds are low. I want to get the best, best bang for my buck. That is performance marketing.
Yeah.
Optimize, and ensure that I deliver it to the extent that you go and you buy my product and then you stick to my product.
No,
So
absolutely.
I think that's the sort of big difference that comes in. Of course, also channel strategy very largely differs. D2C word ही ऐसा है, मतलब you go direct to consumer. Large brands will operate on scale. They will go to your kirana. They will be available everywhere.
Correct.
Because they have that scale that they need to be available everywhere.
Correct.
D2C will have more specialized channels of operating. So I think that largely for me is the difference in terms of how you operate in between a D2C and a large brand. But I think understanding your consumer and nailing that consumer cohort, I think is the fundamental difference, where large brands typically go wider.
Yeah.
D2C goes very sharp.
Targeted.
Very sharp.
Yeah. So how do you think has the larger brands evolved in terms of marketing? Are they finding newer ways of doing things, or
Yeah.
are they, following the D2C route? Like, how is it?
No, I don't think they're following the D2C route because, there is no need to do that, to be very honest. Not all brands, for example, necessarily need to have a D2C platform. Just case in point, right? If my brand is already available in typical ways we call weighted distribution. So just to explain the concept, what it says is, wherever shoppers are buying, if I'm present in 90+% of those points, and I'm not talking only retail outlets, I'm talking e-commerce, I'm talking Q-commerce, every point where my consumer can possibly need or look to shop for me, for my brand, if I'm present, I'm largely covered. I don't necessarily need a D2C wing, unless, of course, there is merit for first-party data.
Right.
The big difference, which I think very few people understand, between selling on an e-commerce, which say typically a Maggie does, versus selling on D2C, is you get first party data.
Correct.
I get direct access to my consumers, which I don't get through any other channel. I always have to rely on somebody else telling me
Correct.
how my shopper is or my consumer is behaving. So I think that is a key difference, that you actually get access, but it depends on what do you need that access for.
Yeah.
If I'm a large brand where there is no need for that direct access, I don't necessarily need to create a D2C strategy.
Correct.
Coming to the second part of your question, which is on how have brands evolved, because all of these concepts are fairly new. If I look back at when I started my career in 2013, if there was no concept of performance marketing, right? These are all things which we've seen and learned in the last 6 to 7 years. But I think overall FMCG has done a great job at least adapting it into the ecosystem of what most brands are doing. You will see customization of content. You will see cohort-based communication that changes. You will see a lot of A/B testing that brands are doing. You will see platform native creatives that are being created and optimized as brands are evolving. You will see brands having a very clear call to action with their Facebook ads, with their YouTube ads. You will see them testing between this CTA versus that CTA.
Correct.
So I think large brands have adopted to this ecosystem. But I think it's not about D2C brands have done this, so we need to do this. I think large brands have done it because that's the way consumers are behaving. And they have adapted to their own consumer set versus saying D2C is doing this, so let me do this.
Correct.
That is what I fundamentally believe.
Correct. So in the beginning, you talked about makeup brands, okay? So
Yeah.
I'm very interested to know. So there are some brands, who've gone from offline to online. So
Yeah.
like L'Oreal, okay? But there are some new age brands who've gone from online to offline, like Sugar.
Right. Yeah.
So how do brands decide when they want to do what, and how do they decide the strategy?
I think there are two aspects to this. I don't know why with everything. I think I just break it down into two so it simplifies it. There is one bit of it which is the consumer, which for me, I think with any brand strat should be your starting point. The second thing of it is the economics of it, which I'll come to, in the second part of what I'm going to talk about. And I think both play in tandem to sort of decide when a brand does what.
Right.
If I were to talk about the consumer side of it, if I were just to very simply, simplify it to the T, why do offline brands go online? Why do online brands go offline? It is very simple. It is basically your consumer is behaving like that.
Yeah.
It is as simple as that. Why is a L'Oreal investing in a D2C plus building its presence on Nykaa, plus investing heavily in GT, those those
Yeah,
typical makeup
correct.
sort of retail outlets that you have, is because they have a large, like I was saying, they have an existing consumer base, and that consumer shopping like that. Now
Yeah.
today, if L'Oreal sticks to its way of operating and says, hey, you know what, I'm big in these GT and these modern trade stores, I'm not going to have an e-commerce presence, when say a person like you or a person like me who is a L'Oreal shopper goes on Nykaa and doesn't find a L'Oreal, I'm going to buy something else. I'm not going to
Yeah.
wait for the 21st of the month when I go to the shop to buy your product.
Correct.
That is consumer reality. So L'Oreal has to do this,
Yeah,
because that's how I'm shopping today. So
correct.
L'Oreal has adapted to my reality. If I look at the reverse of it, Sugar has said, okay, when my shopper is shopping online, I am there. I am top of their mind. They are thinking about me. They're in fact coming to my own app. They are coming to my platform. They're shopping when they're going on Nykaa. They're shopping for my product. But hey, the reality of this is, while I'm really trying to build an online brand, reality is, if I want to grow, my next set of consumers are going to come from people who will say, without trying, I'm not going to buy your brand. Why don't I see it when I go to the store? Why doesn't that Didi who I rely on a lot, my go-to makeup person in that store, unless she recommends it to me, I'm not fully going to trust you.
Correct.
So they've nailed the first set of their consumers, their early adopters, that we'd like to call it. But the brand wants to grow. If the
Correct.
brand wants to grow, they have to look at what the next set of consumers are doing and their behaviors, which is, I will shop offline, I will shop online, and you have to be present in that offline store as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, they have to go offline.
Yeah,
So
I
I think that's the fundamental
Yeah.
of consumer behavior that brands have to adapt. The second thing of it is the economics of it. There is a cost to not as much for large brands to go from online to offline, because pockets deep hote hain. Of course, online requires you to invest to build in capabilities to be able to do that, but then that's it. For relatively smaller brands today, when they decide to go offline, I think the consideration is on what is the cost of distribution. When you go direct to consumer, you cut so many layers, right? I mean, India is a country of many middlemen. So even when from manufacturer to end consumer, I don't think people realize how many chains are there, right?
Correct.
Through the process. You have to build that network to be able to get to that last mile
Correct.
to the last mile store. Sorry, it's not like a sugar manufacturer sitting in Gurgaon decides, hey, that store in Chennai, I'm going to directly courier 10 pieces to that retail
Correct.
beauty outlet. So how do you set up your distribution system, and are you at that scale where you will be able to afford that cost of distribution that you're going to have to
Correct.
incur? That only comes once your brand is of a certain scale and has a certain amount of base awareness that's
Yeah,
already been
correct.
established.
Absolutely.
Then now I want to get, my awareness is at 10, I want to get from 10 to say 40. And hence, with my projections of where I'm going to go, I will be able to afford this cost of distribution.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a lot of the economics that goes behind a lot of online brands affording to go offline,
Yeah.
is because they have reached that base minimum threshold and now they can sort of expand. So I think those
Absolutely.
are the two sides.
So you've
of
put
the-
it like really well. That is what we call today as the omni-channel strategy, and and most of the brands today are focusing on that because the consumer is
The consumer is behaving like
Yeah,
that. There is no
correct,
choice. What
yeah.
will you do? They are going online. Today, think about it. If I want to have a Red Bull, I can order it on QCOM. I can go to my store downstairs. I mean, it's at any
absolutely.
given point in time, any consumer has so many different options. So even the smallest brand to the largest brand has to adapt to
Absolutely.
that change. So I think that's the reality why omni-channel is big, because the shopper has become omni-channel.
Absolutely. So Kanika, I'm sure a lot of listeners would want to know which is your favorite Maggi campaign.
Wow. There are so many. Maggi is such an iconic brand. There are so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
of them. But I think for me, my favorite campaign, and I'm going to talk as a consumer, not as a person on the brand, actually more on the brand and both. But I think was back in the middle when Maggi was not available during the crisis period. Maggi had come up with a campaign. I don't know if you remember it. So it was basically, Maggi was off the shelves. The sales were zero. But consumers were with the brand, and there was massive talk about how much everybody is missing Maggie, because that's how integral a part of
Yeah.
everyone's life Maggie is. And it's very rare, or I think it would be once in a lifetime, where a brand would invest on a large scale campaign when the brand is not present in the market.
Absolutely.
Which, if you remember, is the "We Miss You Too"
Yeah.
Maggie campaign
Yes,
that Maggie
I do
came up
remember.
with. And the fundamental of it was because there was so much talk about how much consumers are missing the brands. I believe the team then was getting so many messages, emails, people telling, the brand managers back then that they are genuinely missing the brand. And based on that, the brand came up with the "We Miss You Too" campaign. Again, like I was telling you, rooted like in a very simple consumer truth of we understand and we will be back, and we will be back with full power. And I think that was one of the most beautiful campaigns that Maggie has done, which was "We Miss
Wow.
You Too." And of course, the one that came once Maggie was back
Back,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think that was like a big moment of success.
Yes.
But I think in the pits and at the point when you're not, I find it incredible, and I mean it's absolutely unimaginable that the brand was not in the market and it was airing such a large scale campaign. So I think that
Yeah.
was that's something that still blows my mind.
But I'm very intrigued to know what goes behind an ad campaign. Like, we always see the end result, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many processes in between. Like, how does that happen?
Let me break this down. People, when they see an ad, what does the consumer take out? Consumer takes out, did I enjoy this ad? मेरे को अच्छा लगा या मेरे को अच्छा नहीं लगा? Did I even notice it, or did it just go unnoticed in my mind?
Yeah.
Nobody's actively trying
Plus,
to listen
today
to the
it's
ads.
so crowded in the digital space, so many ads coming, you
Correct.
really have to make an impact.
But there is a lot of science that goes behind the process, and I'll again keep it simple. But the starting point of making any ad is to say, what is my brand objective, or what is my marketing objective,
Yeah.
so to say. What am I trying to do? So let's take an example of a brand is saying, my job is that I am not being able to acquire new users at the rate at which I was earlier. And hence, I need to accelerate new user acquisition
Correct.
by 2%.
Correct.
That is my marketing objective. That then gets broken down into saying, if this is my marketing objective, who are these 2% new users who I'm
Correct.
looking to bring into
Bring.
my fold?
Yeah.
That becomes my TG, target audience.
Correct.
Who am I going to go behind? So I've defined my target audience as these 2% new users are going to come, hypothetical example, 18 to 24 living in metro cities.
Correct.
Then comes my communication objective. What am I going to tell these 18 to 24-year-olds to get them to come onto my brand?
Correct.
And how am I going to convince them?
Correct.
So my communication objective, say for a brand which is trying to gain new users, will become get consumers or convince consumers 18 to 24-year-old living in metro cities to try XYZ brand of deodorant.
Correct.
Because of whatever is my brand proposition.
Correct.
That becomes my communication objective. That brief with what is my comms task, what is my communication looking to deliver. So there's something which we called SOCO. Marketing people love abbreviations.
Yeah.
So it's called single overriding communication objective.
Correct.
In one line, if I have to ask somebody who has no idea about marketing, if I go back to my mother and ask her, ये ad देख के तुमको क्या समझ में आया? That takeout should match with my single overriding communication
Correct.
objective. The single message, because we fundamentally believe that a single communication only registers one message.
Correct.
A particular consumer can only take out one message out of an ad. If you layer it with too many things,
Yeah.
ये भी है, ये भी है, ये भी है, people don't take out anything. That is what gets translated into what is called a brief that you give to your agencies.
Yeah.
That brief then the agencies work on and come to you with different possible spaces or routes to which
They can
your brand
operate.
can operate in. That then gets translated into scripts that come to you. Those scripts are then validated through extensive consumer testing to say, are consumers understanding it? Actually, space stage pay, there's a lot of consumer work that first happens to identify the right space. Then you move into scripts. There's something called animatics. You create like cartoon versions of your ads, which you test with a certain set of consumers. Typically, you try to get like a dark green or a green preview to say, yes, what my intended messages is actually landing to my consumers. Once all of this has been done, then you go to a production house or a director, like a typical
Yeah.
TH as we call it, and then we tell them, okay, I have tested this film. Now get me a good director and tell me who
Yeah.
is going to translate this into the beautiful film.
Yeah.
So actually, as the marketing team, we actually don't make the ads, which very few people actually understand. We just write. Actually, my job is to nail the brief
Yeah.
and ensure that I do rigorous testing to ensure what I'm trying to do and what my agency is trying to do is what the consumer is getting out of
Correct.
it. That's it.
Correct.
The rest, of course, is a lot of the creative art that the director brings to the fold. And that's how then you finally see the piece of work that comes out. Even after a lot of times, you'll be surprised to know you've done testing at every stage. You've done animatics, it's been tested green. Then you've made an ad, and then you test it again, and sometimes also it doesn't work. So I think the actual moment of truth is once you air the ad,
Yeah. And how are consumers perceiving it?
not how are consumers. What was the metric that you defined this ad needs to move?
Right.
Consumers perceiving it, a lot of time consumers perceive, ad अच्छा नहीं लगा.
Correct.
But आपका objective क्या था? What have you defined as
Correct.
your marketing objective? If it's leading to penetration gains and new users are coming on, and typically we do a something which is called a seen versus not seen analysis. People who have seen, what are they saying, versus people who've not seen your ad, what are they saying? And as long as your ad is green and your ultimate set of lagging KPIs, penetration, growth, imagery, as long as all of those are landing, then your ad is home. If your ad has done a great job, people are loving the ad, people are saying, wow, kya ad banaya, but it's not moving your KPIs, then as a
Yeah.
marketer, you failed.
Yeah. That is
So I
true.
think that's the difference, that consumers only see enjoyability, which is fair because that's what they are supposed to do. But building those memory structures, ensuring that the underlying message is actually delivered to the consumer is the science and the craft of what we as marketers do.
Absolutely. So that brings me to another question. How do you measure the impact of an ad?
So let me help you understand this with an example. Say I'm a shampoo brand and my task is, and I'm a premium shampoo brand again. My task is to get mass shampoo buyers to try my brand.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm a super premium brand, 1500 rupees, body shop type shampoo brand. My impact will be what are the key KPIs that I've set forward, which my campaign should deliver. My campaign should deliver brand or mind measures, as we call it, as one bucket. Business KPIs, which typically are lagging KPIs, which is growth or penetration. And maybe sometimes, other KPIs in terms of, say, if I want to gain share from other brands, etc. So those are the broad three sets in which I get defined, because a lot of times, say for Body Shop, I would always want to see if my ad is having an impact on is a brand that I am okay paying more for, because I'm a very, very premium brand.
Correct.
If I am a brand that, is rooted in, say a proposition of I give you benefits that no other brand gives you, then I would want my consumers to feel is a brand that gives me benefits like no other, or is a brand that truly nourishes my hair, depending on what the brand is and what the proposition is. So I think there's one big aspect of impact, which is mind measures, because every campaign's impact is not what is going to happen to my sales next month. It is about the kind of equity that what is the sort of recollection or the memory structures that I'm building in my consumer's mind, which are very subtle, very nuanced. So I think a big part of it is to actually set forward, ये जो statements मैं इतनी easily बोल रही हूँ, ये है क्या आपके brand के लिए?
Correct.
what is this for my particular brand? What are these mind measures which are eventually going to result in long-term growth? And then, of course, the short-term measures of saying whatever was the impact that I was looking for. If I was looking for an impact in terms of saying my youth TG does not think I'm cool anymore, something that we as a brand on Maggie often, try to address, of saying we're a trendy brand. Is that impact happening with this ad? That is what I would measure. I'm a brand that wants to ensure that my leaky bucket is stopping, my lapsing from my brand is not going to happen anymore. Then I would measure that as my key KPI for impact. So I think that's how between long-term and short-term impact gets measured in terms of creative effectiveness. A lot of times it can be as simple as, is my message landing? Are people even understanding what I'm trying to say?
Correct.
If I'm measuring impact in terms of digital creatives, I would say first 5 seconds, what is being taken out? Stop there. Do a lot of qualitative assessment to understand 30 seconds, nobody's watching, interest span has gone. Tell me, I will show my ad to say only 100 people, and stop at the 6th second and ask them, now tell me what did you understand? Did you even register? This is an ad from XYZ brand.
Right.
Then I'll move on to saying, okay, now tell me what message did landed to you in 5 seconds. If they say nothing landed, I didn't even understand which brand it was, lost.
Correct.
So I think depending on which platform you're creating for, what your objective is, it's sounds fairly simple because ultimately you just see one ad that goes out, but complex set of
Absolutely.
a lot of work that has to go behind defining that.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well put. Yeah, I think measuring the impact is very important when you kind of do an ad
Yeah.
campaign. Otherwise, how do you access whether what you've done is right or wrong? So
Right.
absolutely. So now that we come to the end of the podcast, I would love for you to give our viewers top 3 advices that you would have for aspiring and current brand managers.
I think first is be obsessed with whoever is your target audience. Really understand everything that you can. Spend as much time. I think it's we feel that we know a lot of times, but I think the more time you spend it, because marketing is a balance between a science and an art. So I think there are some things which require you to be very left-brained, but some things that require you to be very right-brained. So the more time you spend on building your craft, the better you get at it. And spending time with your consumers is the first step towards really understanding what goes behind building a brand. So I think that's the first. I think the second, which I think is true for anybody in marketing today, is to be always in a mode where you're learning. Because like we were talking, look at the amount of disruption that's coming in.
Yeah.
If you stay fixed on a certain view of how things are supposed to be, you're not going to adapt very well to what your brand may require. So I think that's the second big thing, to constantly learn. And I think learning need not necessarily be if you're on a brand. Learning can also be by reading up a lot. Learning can also be of saying, you know what, let me look at 10 ads of a certain brand and just see what I can take out of it. And then read about the brand to see, just genuinely be interested.
Correct.
I think a lot more comes to your mind when you are actually interested in doing something. So that learning helps you more than any sort of bookish learning. And the third most difficult to do is to be prepared for failure.
Yeah.
Because two sides to it. One, even you might do everything that you might have done everything right, you might have done everything that marketing principles teach you, but ultimately, like I was telling you, the moment of truth is when it goes out, whether it's a new product or it's a new campaign or it's a new packaging. How do consumers react to it? And a lot of times we can do our best, but then consumers react differently. And to have the humility to say, I will adapt, I will change, and I will fix what needs to be done.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it is to sort of accept that things will not go your way. You might think of a certain idea as a great idea, and I think that's one of the biggest things that existing brand managers will have to sort of combat, which is to say, you get obsessed with your own idea, and you sort of tend to ignore certain signs that might just tell you that you're not going on the right track because you think your idea is so great. So I
Right.
think that sort of humility is something that you need to have, and you need to be prepared that you'll do your best, but things may not always work out in terms of end result. But then be agile enough to adapt, and I'm sure then things fall in place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much, Kanika, for coming today and
Thank you so
sharing
much.
so many insights with us. So thank you so much.
I think it was a great experience for me. I'm facing the camera for the first time, but yeah, super excited. I hope it helps all
Absolutely.
your budding aspirants and existing brand managers to
Absolutely.
carve great careers for themselves.
Absolutely. If you liked our content and want to see more of it, do like this video, share with your friends and subscribe to our channel.